There we go. Now we don't have to worry about that. Okay, welcome everybody. I'm going to, for most of this session, I'm going to be a little voice in the ether and share some slides because it's I want to show you some information, but I'm also going to make you work as well. So I'm going to start screen sharing. Please, if you have a question at any point, or if you can't see the slides, just unmute and yell at me. So can somebody confirm you can see my slide and only my slide?
Yep.
Yeah, I can see them.
Fantastic. Lovely. Will you be good enough to put your name and rank and serial number up? This is me. I'm the fairly new community training consultant at DCA. I've been there since May. I've got a background in voluntary and community sector, having started as a volunteer in Birmingham back in the dinosaur days. And I've been where you are. I've been a trustee, I've been a chair, but I've also been a caseworker, volunteer, CEO, and I've run my own social interest company, doing consultancy for charities. And it's a world that I love, and I'm constantly blown away by the dedication and the knowledge and the passion that people in the sector have. What I am good at, and what I hope I'm bringing to the table, is to add to your passion my knowledge of infrastructure, and that is partly what I want to do today. So here we go. One of the things I've been hired to do is to create the DCA Academy. The other part of my role is very much doing one-to-one work with organisations as a consultant. And we're in the process of developing these 7 modules. And as you will imagine, this course fits into that module, the governance and trustees. But of course, they're very interrelated because trustees are really involved in business planning and doing business plans, and also key people when it comes to making partnerships and so on. So what we're doing is producing a number of courses and materials and so on around this, these issues. Governance and trustees is going to be written in full, hopefully, by December, and we'll be having a range of resources online, live, and in person. And then the others will be launched over the next few months. So today, I want to look at how is good governance defined. I want to introduce you in some detail to the Charity Governance Code. It's an excellent resource. And the Charity Commission's seminal leaflet, The Essential Trustee. We're also going to look at sort of how do you manage it all, because it's all quite a lot, and how that fits into the trustee year, and how you as a board can make sure you've got all the skills that the organisation needs. So let's start with a basic definition. This is the Charity Governance Code that I just mentioned. And what this says is that leadership is absolutely crucial to the success of the organisation. Skilled and capable trustees will help a charity attract resources and put them to good use. And it also makes sure that the organisation is compliant with various sorts of legislation. But more than that, to a great extent, the trustee board sets the culture of the organisation. So the Good Governance Code, the Charity Governance Code, and I'm always irresistibly reminded of the Pirate Code when I talk about this. And it was developed years and years ago now by these organisations, some fairly meaty organisations. The Charity Commission took oversight. ACIVO is the Association of Chief Executives of Voluntary Organisations. The National Council for Voluntary Organisations and the Small Charities Coalition all got together with others. And basically what they wanted to do was to quantify what is good governance. And so they did a huge consultation, many grassroots organisations, and they came up with 7 principles. And those 7 principles have remained more or less the same. They've just released version 3.1, having beefed up the equalities, diversity and inclusion principle, and also the integrity principle, because as you know, the charity sector has gone through a lot over the last few years, scandal after scandal, from Kids Company to some of the scandals about the way aid workers have behaved overseas and everything in between. And it's knocked the confidence of the public, and that's been reflected in donations, in the number of volunteers and so on. Ironically, the pandemic has restored a lot of people's faith in the charity and voluntary sector, because as a sector we've stepped up in a way, well, we knew we could do it, but a lot of other sectors in the press, government, have been stunned by the response of people, neighbourhoods, groups, and how much difference they've made during the pandemic. And thousands of those small groups have, as you know probably better than I do, have stayed together because through that process, they have identified needs in their communities. And so work like the Charity Governance Code remains very relevant because it helps us together to think through how good governance is done and what it entails. Any questions so far?
Yeah, I've got a question.
Oh, go on.
Yeah, I mean, this talk, does all this just apply to Charity Commission registered enterprises? We're actually a community benefit society. There's also CICs, and I'm willing to bet that not everybody here is anything to do with the charity is a registered charity.
That's an enormously good point, Nick.
Right. And how much of this should we take on board, and can it be pared down?
The answer is yes.
Yeah. Right.
Yes. I mean, I think the answer is yes, because all of this is good stuff. It all applies to any organisation. So whether you're a steering group yet to constitute, whether you're, as you say, a different type of group, or even a CIC, it's called the Charity Governance Code, but these are good principles. And more to the point, they are principles that are known to funders like the National Lottery and some of the big trusts. And these are, in general, things they expect to see in organisations that they are working with. In answer to your question, can it be pared back? Yes and no. There is a version for small organisations without staff, and there's a version for bigger charities. But you'll see, hopefully, as we go through, that the principles they're not complicated. They're not add-ons. They are about how you work, how you do business. And it's about doing that really, really well, which it doesn't matter who or what type of organisation you are. As trustees, you want to do things well and effectively. You want to be open and inclusive, and you want to be accountable. So all of these things apply right across the board. But we'll do an exercise in a little while that hopefully will enable you to think about how these apply to you specifically. So hold that thought and challenge me on it later on. Okay, so the 7 principles of the Charity Governance Code are these, and they seem fairly obvious because when you're leading an organisation, whether it's legally bound to be for the public benefit, like a registered charity, or whether you're just talking good practice with a community organisation, you want it to have integrity, good leadership, and you want to have solid decisions that manage risk and control the finances and things like that. So all of this is common sense. And they look at it like this, that the foundation is what you as trustees do, and your understanding of your role and the context of the charity or the organisation itself. And then the things I've mentioned, good decision making, leadership, the effectiveness of the trustee board or steering group, support the organisational purposes. So there's a little house there. And I mentioned the foundation of the charity context, and the Charity Governance Code really is based on the fact that you as trustees are committed to the cause, and you've joined because you want to help the charity deliver its purposes. Now, a lot of organisations, particularly that are smaller, will be at a point where the trustees are also really hands-on. And I've been working with an organisation this week that is just coming to the point where it's going to hopefully get its first really big bit of funding. And the trustee board are thinking about how they manage the change between everybody doing everything and everybody having a differentiation in their roles. So some people are hands-on with the work, they are volunteering in some of the services and so on, but the trustees also have to do the governance. And at the moment, that's a bit of an add-on, but going forward, it'll have to be a separate thing. So this is where this comes in, because the roles and responsibilities of trustees are laid down in the Charity Commission, and they don't involve volunteering to deliver the services. They are different from that. And we'll come back to that a bit more in a moment. He mentions here the essential trustee, which is a Charity Commission guidance, and is the absolute minimum for any trustee to have read and understood, together with the charity's governing document, whatever that may be. And that is really absolutely fundamental. And the essential trustee says that you have the following duties. And those are about very, very similar to what I've just said about the governance code. Manage your charity's resources responsibly, which is, they used to be put in oldie worldy language, and this remains my favourite, the duty of prudence. And these are not just nice to haves, these are must haves, because if you don't, as trustees or directors or whatever, act with reasonable care and skill, you can be sued for negligence. And even if you have a constitution that limits your personal liability, negligence is the exception to that. You can be personally sued for negligence. But I'm not trying to frighten you in any way, shape or form. And this is the rather interesting infographic that the essential trustee shows about those 6 duties. I've chosen to talk about the governance code today because there is a richness there. This is how the essential trustee and the charity governance code fit together. They're very, very similar. They cover similar areas. And in many ways, the charity governance code fleshes out and is intended to flesh out the Charity Commission guidance. Any questions at this point?
No.
What, not even from Nick? Good grief.
No.
We'll go on then a little bit. I will make you do. I'll stop talking at you in fairly shortly.
Caro, sorry, can I
Yes,
ask a
go on.
question?
Yes.
I think it's time to look at the pack you sent out, which sounds brilliant. Are these sorts of things in the pack?
Some of this is and some of this isn't, but you'll also get the slides
Fantastic.
after. I tend not to send really complicated packs because then you're reading it rather than listening, and I do prefer to be listened to. So, okay, yes, those will go around. What I won't send is detailed notes. Jane.
Yeah, just a quick one about we have a constitution, so we have a registered charity number. Having picked this up, I know it's way out of date.
Right.
One of my questions is trying to introduce everybody to their responsibilities as trustees. Yes. The document you've mentioned as an essential trustee, is that forwarded by the Charity Commission to trustees as they then become named, or do we have to do that ourselves?
No, you would think, wouldn't you? But no, you have to do it yourselves.
Okay.
And one of the things that quite often we get asked is about what should be included in a trustee induction. And essentially that is the trustee induction, a copy of the constitution, so they know what's required of them, and a copy of this leaflet. I mean, there are other ways of inducing your trustees, but that is the fundamental. One of the things I was asked actually recently was about doing something about trustee induction. So hopefully we'll be producing a resource that might help with that. Okay, so I mentioned the 7 principles. So what I want to think about now is looking at them in slightly more detail. Each principle has a number of high-level outcomes, and underneath that it has quite detailed sort of implementation. Oh, I meant to have this up earlier. So it has quite detailed implementation notes. So, for instance, if we're looking at organisational purpose, these are the key outcomes that it has. So this is the sort of just top level, which applies or can applies to everybody, whether they're technically a board or a steering group or a management committee. And underneath those, they break it down into recommended practice. So that, for example, when it says the board can demonstrate that the charity is effective in achieving its charitable purposes, it says something like the board periodically reviews the charitable purposes and the external environment in which it works to make sure that the charity and its purposes stay relevant and valid. And that's an action point. That's something that you as a board need to be doing at least annually and so on. But that's a whole different training course. I won't go into that. And it says things like the board leads the development of and agrees a strategy that aims to achieve the charity's charitable purposes. So you can break each of these outcomes down into a number of tasks, not all of which apply to all organisations to the same degree, because if you're a really small organisation, your strategic plan could be a sort of back of an envelope job as opposed to a 17-page document, but each organisation varies. So this one, organisational purpose, is about you as a board taking the lead on identifying the direction of travel of the organisation, the strategy over the next few years. But you also have to be able to explain that to your volunteers, to your service users, but also to the funders and your community and outside stakeholders, by which I mean people who are affected by what you do or who affect what you do. And this whole idea of demonstrating the charity is effective has a good crossover with accountability, which we'll talk about in a moment. But it has to be linked also with achieving the targets that your funders have set you, or even to the extent that you're fulfilling your mission. So it's quite an overarching one, as we've seen on the model. And it's a very, very useful one to take some time to debate as a trustee board. I mentioned leadership earlier, and this is about working together and, horrible phrase, but walking the talk. If you as trustees are seen to be exemplifying the charity's values, that you are, for example, going out of your way to recruit a diverse board with good lived experience that is representative of the communities you work with, then that kind of shows for anybody who meets you, who sees the written materials of the charity, because you are showing what it all means. It's also about making sure that the direction of the charity is known within the charity. So you have discussed it with the staff, with the volunteers, that you have encouraged them to plan the operations for the next year or so in the light of the strategy and the direction that you have laid down. And it's about having that two-way dialogue as well. The next one, integrity, which is one they've just updated.
Can I ask a question?
Please do, Alison.
The charitable purposes.
Yes.
Active, they're kind of laid down in the Constitution.
Yeah.
When you become a charity.
Yeah.
And ours are a bit, we're not very happy with them. They're a bit woolly and very old-fashioned in wording.
Yes.
For the benefit of. How easy is it to change them?
It's a bit of a palaver. A lot of organisations these days are adopting the new template model of the charitable incorporated organisation. Well, it's newish, it's not terribly new these days. And in that process, they're thinking through their charitable objects. Now, the charitable objects still have to be put in fairly archaic language, because there's something like 12 or 14 acceptable charity objects or areas within which you could work for the public benefit. And it's got to be one of those. So you're a bit restricted by that. But that's not to say that your mission statement, whether or not you actually update your constitution, so long as all of what you're doing is still roughly within what your constitution says, your mission statement can be a lot sexier and updated. And that is what you sort of nail to your standards. So your objects are sort of the starting point, but your mission statement or your strategic plan can be a lot more dynamic and up to date.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, cool. So integrity, that is the legal stuff I mentioned earlier, about acting with honesty and care for the resources of the organisation. But it's also about how you make decisions, that you monitor any conflict of interests, and you document that you've thought about that, particularly if the decision that you're making is a big one or a complicated one with implications. But it's also about how you as a group work together, that you don't allow the board to get cliquey, and that you make sure everybody has a fair and equal chance to influence what is said. This, for me, in many ways is the key one of these, because it's what I said earlier, that a trustee board or directors board has to focus on the strategy, monitoring the performance of the charity overall, so taking an oversight of things, and assuring that things like the risks that the organisation faces are managed. And it's quite a difficult transition for a small organisation to divorce that from the operational matters. But the board would receive reports on operational matters and give support in any crisis, rather than make decisions in operational matters. I always give the example of I worked with the Badger Trust a few years ago, which is an umbrella organisation for the marvellous work of local badger groups. And I was going down to observe a trustee meeting and then do a training for the trustees in the afternoon. And when I got there, I was told that the trustee meeting had been abandoned because sadly the badger cull had been extended the night before by the government. And so the trustee board abandoned the whole of the meeting to discuss about judicial reviews and press releases and this, that and the other. Very, very important work. But among the items they'd abandoned on that agenda was the appointment of a CEO, agreeing the budget for the following year, and much, much more. So in the afternoon, when I was doing the training, I banned the B word. I said, you have to talk about your organisation without mentioning badgers at all. And there was consternation, as you can imagine. And we did an entire exercise, and because it was a weekend and it was a team building exercise, I asked them to collage the future. Now that may sound potty, but it actually does work very well. And brought a load of magazines, and they were kind of talking about what the organisation wanted to be in 3 years and so on, in terms of its membership and supporting its membership. And somebody found a picture of a badger and cut it out and stuck it in the bottom corner. So it's quite difficult to be a board and not get bound up in those operational matters, because that's what you joined, because you're passionate about those issues. But it is essential at this point. And this also says about the decision-making and monitoring framework and the sound management of resources. So that's having the right finance reports. It's about taking an overview of HR and that sort of thing. And you have, as a board, to decide how risk averse you're going to be, given where you are. And as I mentioned, where you're not being hands-on with operational matters, you have to have a clear idea of which staff members or subcommittees or external consultants are doing what, and keep oversight of that. Effectiveness. And this, we're going to go into this in a bit more detail in a moment, and I will stop talking soon, I promise, because this is about you having the right skills as a board. You don't all have to have all of the skills, but somebody on the board has to have the skills you need. And this gives quite a lot of emphasis to the role of chair, about building the team and creating a good relationships and a good open culture where people can say things, and things get resolved and sorted out. But everybody has the responsibility of making their points in the meeting, of being open about any reservations they have about decisions, so that everybody on the board can talk about things thoroughly. But once decisions have been made, everybody unites behind them. And whether that's done by a vote or a majority talking in a meeting, that is what is binding. You can revisit them as a board formally, but it's not appropriate for any trustee to go away and talk to the staff or whatever, saying, oh, well, I didn't agree with that, and so on. You work collectively. Now, this can be a very difficult one for boards. And it's very difficult to see often what the barriers are. And that could be something so simple as when your meetings are. If you're always 3 o'clock on a Thursday afternoon, well, that's going to be really difficult for parents with young children to engage with that. So it's a question of thinking about, what does equality, diversity, inclusion mean to you? And taking that to its logical conclusion of making sure that if you always produce agendas and papers in printed form, that they're produced for a daisy reader, or even that in an audio form, so that people who are blind or partially sighted could be trustees, if that's important to you. I did a piece of work some while ago with an organisation that wanted its service users on as full trustee board members. and there's not a lot of material around for people with learning disabilities. So that was quite a challenge. And any board that works with particular beneficiary groups or within particular communities really benefits from having those viewpoints either on the board or on a key subcommittee of the board, because that brings skills and knowledge into the organisation. And there is a course that we're going to be repeating probably early next year around how to recruit trustees for representation and diversity. So this is the final one. This is about openness and accountability. And I've mentioned stakeholders, people who are affected by what you do, but also people who affect you, like funders, the local authority, and so on. And I've also mentioned about the public trust, because particularly if you're relying on donations or volunteers or something, the public have to trust you. And that's not only about you, that's about the whole sector. But your charity has to be, show how ethical it is and how well run it is. The last one on this page is a very, very interesting one, because quite often when you work with a group, when you work in the grassroots, you're asked, well, what do old people think about this? Or what do kids who use skateboard parks need in the community? And so you need to have legitimacy if you're giving an opinion. And part of that legitimacy is the representation you have from the user groups at whatever level. But part of that is based in having done a solid needs analysis, or having gathered data on the impact you've made. And all of that adds legitimacy to you as a charity. So I'm going to stop sharing briefly. That's a lot of information to throw at you, for which I apologise. So, sorry, let me just sort my screen out. Are there any comments or questions, particularly at this point? Jane.
Can I just ask a quick one, and how the Charity Commission views an organisation as they're trying to pull themselves together to fit these principles? Because as you're talking, my list of things to do is growing enormously, and how I'm going to tackle it. And we are already registered as a charity. How much leeway is there, and how much understanding is there on behalf of the Charity Commission to you redrawing yourselves?
There is a lot, an awful lot. I mean, I was having this discussion with somebody the other day. The Charity Commission actually doesn't have a lot of muscle. In some ways, the worst that can happen is that you get trustees can be individually banned, and a trustee can be and a charity can be struck off, which isn't good, obviously, because you'd lose your contracts with funders and things like that. And if there is obviously malpractice in the legal sense, with money or whatever, that is dealt with in a criminal court or whatever. But in general, the Charity Commission isn't a watchdog. They are an advisor. And actually, it's the court of public opinion. And by that, I mean not only your local community or service users, but your funders, other charities, and so on. So it's important to have good governance, but it's an honour system, really. You will do better. There's no getting around it. Charities or community organisations with good governance, it shows, and they do tend to be slightly more successful, but it's chicken and egg, because often big funders like the National Lottery say, okay, you've got a great idea, got a great links within your community, actually you could do with a slightly bigger trustee board, a number of different skills on it. Quite often we're asked to do a thing called a strength review, which goes into all of this and makes recommendations for all aspects of improving the organisation, but especially governance and trustees, because a lot of organisations at that point are doing exactly what I was saying earlier. They're trying to separate out the trustee role from general volunteering, and that can be a difficult transition. And funders do understand that you're in a process of change, and they will support you quite often, as will we. So don't worry if you've got a long to-do list. There's lots of help, lots of links out there, and I'll talk in a little while towards the end about some other of the training courses we're doing, the resources and so on. And there's lots of other organisations out there doing that sort of thing.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, by all means.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, these days the Financial Conduct Authority has quite a lot of impact on CICs, community benefit societies, and so on. Also, possibly more so than the Charities Commission, I would say.
Absolutely. And I think also organisations like the Institute of Fundraising, who put out some guidance, are also really influential, because in certain circumstances, trustees have to have in their annual reports and accounts a statement about how they manage fundraising ethically. There's a lot of guidelines.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. What they have done to meet their aims. You know, that's exactly. A standard report with the Financial Conduct Authority now. How have you tried to meet how have you met your aims this year?
Yeah, absolutely. And the SOFA regulations for the trustees' annual report to go with the accounts is very much about that. It's very prescriptive. You can see that on the Charity Commission about what you have to legally put in your report. So, okay, good. Right. So I've thrown that all at you. So I want to give you a little bit of a chance to think about that. I'm going to divide you, technology permitting, into 3 groups. And you'll see on page 5 of your workbook that I've taken 3 or 4 of the outcomes that are in the Charity Governance Code. And what I'd like you to do, please, is to, within your groups, talk about what that says. Think about, does that apply to you? And if it doesn't, it's not something you do as a trustee board, how might you work towards it? So I'm going to divide you into 3 breakout rooms. I'm going to bring you back in 10 minutes, so about 5 to 11. But if your little group finishes before that, just come back into the main area. Okay, here goes. I will create. Okay, So room 1 is Nat, Nick, and Traino 3. Room 2 is Alison, Dorrie, and Teresa. Room 3 is Fiona, Jane, and Peter. Okay, here we go. You need to join those. So click on that. Good. Keep going. You need, that's it. Okay, Teresa and Alison, just click on the invitation. There we go. Can you see that, Teresa? Are you there? Okay. Just waiting for people to come back here. Okay, room 3 is definitely hanging on.
We have the problem is that Nat cannot unmute herself on her piece of
Oh
technology.
no. Sorry, Nat. So you were kind of doing charades, were you, for some of the key concepts?
Exactly.
Oh well, you know, that's oh, lovely. Okay. Oh dear, I'm sorry to hear that, Nat. If you've got any questions, just stick them in the chat and I'll see them at some point. Okay, good. So welcome back, everybody. Sorry I called you Peter, Karen. So how was that for you? Interesting discussion?
Yes, Nick and I both felt that we were covering group 2. We were group 2, that we were quite confident that we're doing that correctly.
Good. Well, I'm going to screen share so we can talk about this in slightly more detail. So hold on one second.
Has started screen sharing.
Okay. So who was talking about this one? The board can demonstrate the charity is effective in achieving its charitable purposes and agreed outcome. That was group 1, I think. So Nat and Nick.
Yeah, we can. Yes, I think so. We can demonstrate this because we are, the purpose of our charity is to help the economic development of the town. We run 2 shops, and so it's fairly obvious to the town if the shops are being successful or not. Just judged by the number of people.
Yeah.
And then, but then people expect something tangible to see. I mean, almost physically. And so we've just paid the insurance from, there's a Trishaw, which is a 3-wheel bike with electrics on it, cost 7,000 quid. And we've actually paid for not the whole thing, but the insurance for that. And it's seen around town and it's publicised in the Blackmore Vale magazine and other magazines.
Oh, how interesting.
So it's
important.
It's
a really tangible way of doing it.
It's really important that the tangible things you can see, and we can point to them all around the town. But there's a whole lot of intangible things you can't see, which are done. They're like providing jobs for 3 people in the town, and almost providing a new community. Actually, a lot of people have come out of the woodwork, and the shops we run have provided. Not being pretentious, it's something for them to do, another interest in life.
Yeah.
And
and I can see from what Nat said is that her board are reviewing their commitments. And there is a good amount of focus on walking through their commitments and seeing explicit deliverables and tangible benefits, so very similar. Another way of doing that, as I mentioned, might be the impact report or annual report that a board does. So leadership. This was the one about collective responsibility, which was group 3, Fiona, Jane and Karen. I can't hear.
Which group were we in?
Yes, it was group 3 did this one, I think.
Yeah, I was in group 3. It's just Jane.
Yes, hi Jane.
And I think we had quite a varied discussion. So between the 3 of us, we have a board that was quite well established and extremely professionally run, and 2 of us it was trying to bring our charities together and start forming these documents. And actually, it sounds great to have the board as a whole and collective responsibility. The practicalities of achieving that, particularly in the short term, it's very, very difficult. And I think we were sort of realising that perhaps sometimes you have to just take leadership, get something on paper, despite what everybody's saying around you, and then from that point get others to, you know, to take then collective responsibility and amend as you go along. But it's not as easy. It doesn't feel as easy as it sounds on paper.
Absolutely, and I think one of the things I'm always banging on about is the need for having a overarching strategic document, and that also goes back to what Nap's just said about promoting what the charity does, and having a strategy for the next few years that takes account of changes in the external environment, because even if you are doing what you do and have always done, you have to change and develop because the world around you is changing. I mean, who could have predicted COVID and the changes that brought? So I think having a strategy, possibly encapsulating that as part of a business plan, a whole nother course, then that can help you to nail your standard to the mast, and to, as you say, to have that conversation internally that means people can engage. Good. Integrity. There was a couple here. So who was talking about that? I think that was Fiona, Jane and Karen again. Any thoughts? Oh, and group 2, Alison and her group were talking about the second one of these, the interest the charity, the best interest the charity's purposes. Has anybody got any thoughts?
I see you, Alison. Are you going to pick it up? No.
Dory, talk to us.
It's all right, you can do the talking. We had a bit of technical troubles, so we didn't get very far.
Sorry.
We didn't quite pick it up in the way it is written there.
Okay.
We did pick up the difficulty in having a board that feels inclusive enough for everyone to be on board at the same point. Particularly with having had the pandemic, which has disrupted everything, how that has made it difficult for some groups to keep that cohesiveness. And the difference between having an operational level and a management level, and would that duplicate jobs for everybody, which might be very, very difficult for them to do if that was going to happen. So do you want to unpick that a little bit for me? Well, how do you mean duplicate jobs? For our charity, we have a trustees level, and we have a management level. So the management level can deal with all the how it's done and what's being done. Report back to the trustees, and the trustees can check out that's still within the organisational interest. You faded out a bit, Dory. so the trustees can keep an eye on where changes need to happen and what needs to be given a particular interest.
Yes. So it's not so much a duplication as you say, working at different levels. So the trustees take the oversight and the strategic view. Yeah, I see.
Alison can correct me. I got the impression from her that with a smaller number of people where the roles aren't quite so identified so clearly, that it sometimes worries people that they've got too much to do and they can't manage all that.
Absolutely. And we'll come on in a moment or two to that in a little bit more detail. So hold that thought. That's very useful. Thinking about this, decision-making, risk and control goes exactly back to what you were just saying, Dorrie. And I think that was group one, but has anybody got any thoughts on this one?
We did assign one trustee to go away and do a detailed risk assessment and make a risk management plan, and actually that has quite focused our thoughts on what we need to do, and and that was very useful actually. That's
a really good example. And again, we'll come back to that in just a moment. Let's just look at the last couple of or three of these. So this is about the role of the chair, but also about making decisions together. I'm just seeing that. Yes, there does need to be more documentation, mission statement, etc., and a list of what's being done. I think you mean a plan. So how can you measure something if you're not entirely clear what good looks like or where you're trying to get to? Yes, I completely agree with that. Yes, and I totally agree. Objectives is a horrible word. So who was thinking about these two? I think group three, Fiona, Jane and Karen. Any thoughts?
In actuality, in the group, we only managed the first statement, so we didn't.
That's fair enough.
But just on a personal level, because the chair of our organisation has just stepped down along with the long-standing treasurer, and we are left. But actually, just talking, because I've probably fallen foul of this already. Just listening to talking this morning, I've just kind of rushed in with my hands open, trying to catch things, and actually. What would be really, really helpful is to step back and think, what are we actually trying to achieve? Because there's so much to do, but actually at the root of everything is that. And just putting that first, that's been a good thing to hear this morning.
Good. Well, if it's any help, we've just started putting together a trustee recruitment fair. Probably will be early in the new year, because there's an awful lot of organisations out there who have had a change in personnel during the pandemic, and people haven't come back and things like that. So we're going to do what we can to try and help. So watch this space on that one. So just quickly, finally, any thoughts from anybody on how useful it is to reflect different perspectives, experience and skills?
Well, without a doubt, I think it's absolutely vital. All of us have different experiences, and you've just come from one environment. You have a very narrow view of life, or what you've done. So
Good point.
Advocate wide experiences, wide perspectives.
And what do any of you have service users or former service users or people affected by the issues you're dealing with on your board?
Yes, we do.
Yeah, good.
But that causes its own problems in that then they're not quite up to dealing with the technology, particularly in the past 2 years as we've had to have remote meetings.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that, to be fair, that can be true of many trustees I've known. But yes, and then finally, looking at openness and accountability. Has anybody got a thought about how you, I mean, it goes back to what we were saying, or particularly what the points Nat was making about telling people what you do, why you do it, and how you do it, and what difference you're making. But it's also about the integrity. Has anybody got any other final points on this?
Yes, I have actually. We've had the question of the AGM being open to all we've tried to make it open to all service users and volunteers and staff and so on, and make it open and accountable. But then we are a bit reluctant that they might vote us off or vote new people. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yes. I mean, with an AGM, it's a difficult one. You are bound usually by your constitution to have one. It prescribes the business. So taking nominations and sometimes voting for trustees is part of that. But quite a lot of AGMs go along with presentations of not only the nuts and bolts of the accounts, but presentations about the work or about the issues or something like that. So you can use it on a number of different levels, be engaging, to tell people about your work, and to do so openly. Your accounts, for example, are a matter of public record. Anybody can look those up. And so, but I take your point. It depends what kind of organisation you are. If you're a foundation, CIO or similar, the trustees make the decisions, including the appointment of other trustees, and the AGM ratifies that. If you're a membership organisation of any description, then you have to have the trustees voted on by the membership. And so that has to be handled fairly well by the organisation, but it depends on your constitution, whether you have a term of office for your trustees, and so they have to step down or whatever. So there is no one size fits all about AGMs, but it's worth having a think about and thinking about openness and accountability when you do. So, okay, I'm going to stop sharing just for a moment. Thank you. That was a really good piece of work. You've done a lot of discussion and thinking. And I'm sorry I only gave you sort of 10 minutes there. But there's quite a lot I'd like to cover this morning. Are there any other questions from that? Are you beginning to see how they are overarching issues here, as opposed to things that you may or may not have? Jane, were you raising a hand?
Just a very quick, and I'm just taking an opportunity really to ask you a question I could probably look up, but is there a minimum number of trustees that any organisation ought to have?
It is entirely what's in your constitution. The draft, the template constitutions, I think recommend between about 3 as a starting point, 2 or 3 as a starting point. If you're a company, you have to have a minimum of 2, I believe. Good practice would be around 8 to 10, because then if somebody, you'll quite often get 2 people leaving at once. I don't know why that is, but you do. And it's a good size for the quorum, so 3 for the quorum. And it generally means you've got enough people. Okay, actually that brings us on very neatly to, let me go back to the screen share, to the next bit. Okay.
Screen share.
So, what do trustees do? Now, this goes, can anybody see that?
Yep.
Yeah, good. Okay, good. And I apologise for the typo in the final line. I've just seen it. You can look at things a million times. And this goes back to what we were talking about earlier about differentiating governance and trustee work from the rest. And this is essentially, if we're putting the nuts and the flesh on the bones of what the Charity Commission and the Charity Governance Code say, this is the sort of meat of it. So a trustee has to take financial oversight. We were talking about managing the resources of the charity. That would be quarterly management accounts, so how the budget, the organisation's going against the budget. Trustees have to produce an annual report and accounts. We mentioned that earlier, that's laid down by the Charity Commission and the financial regulations. It comes under the SOFA regulations. Don't ask me what that means. And if you have an audit or a review of your finances each year, the trustee board takes the lead usually on working with the accountants and agreeing all that. We mentioned strategic planning, and that is looking at the environment, looking at the political forces, opportunities that might be there, or challenges given. For instance, a lot of organisations have been very hit by the fact that their volunteers mostly come from retired people, and that with the retirement age going and people often working longer, they're having fewer volunteers come through. So keeping an eye on that sort of thing in the longer term, but also monitoring progress against your thinking as you go along. There is an argument that the trustees own the strategic plan and your ops team own the operational plan, but trustees often have a contribution to make there. And then what the trustees may do is monitor progress, usually on a quarterly basis or a bi-monthly basis. You receive operations reports, and those can be really specific, saying this was our target. Halfway through the year, we're halfway to the target, or we've achieved the target, or whatever. So you can then concentrate on areas that are not going well to support the staff and to monitor that. Somebody mentioned earlier about having a trustee with a specific responsibility, and they may have a portfolio to have oversight of a certain area of work. That doesn't mean doing it, that means monitoring and guiding, sometimes mentoring the staff or volunteers who are doing it. And we'll come back again to this when we're talking about what skills you need on the board. One of your key tasks is to agree a budget, to monitor progress, as I've said, and also to keep an eye on the policy environment, the policies that you have. And for those of anybody who came to the policies talk will know that we as an organisation advocate there are some policies that are absolutely essential to have and some that are useful to have that there's some that are contingent on what you do. So something like a safeguarding policy, health and safety, and GDPR policies and procedures are absolutely essential for most organisations. You as a board need to ensure those are up to date and fully implemented. You may or may not, depending on what you do, have a income generation plan or premises plan. Most organisations would have some kind or would benefit from having some kind of marketing and communications plan. And if you remember earlier, we were talking about telling people what you do and how essential that is as an organisation. The risk management plan is another really must-have, and that's not looking at the sort of day-to-day operational risks. That's looking at things like what are the consequences for not submitting your accounts on time, for not complying with the legal requirements for HMRC. Can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
Yeah, yes, I can.
I'm being unstable again, I think. The Charity Commission defines 5 areas of organisational risk, which are governance, compliance, operations, finances, and the other one, which is terribly important. And as a trustee board, you need to have thought about all of those. It doesn't have to be a huge document, but it does have to have been thought of. And you're also bound to delegate appropriately, and we'll look at that again in just a moment. So on the premise that in general trustee boards meet, probably about 4 or 5 times a year, and then you may have an away day once a year maybe. So on average, most trustee boards have about 15 hours a year to do their governance stuff. If you're having meetings of longer than 3 hours, apart from the away day, you're probably overtaxing your trustees. So if each one of these squares represents an hour, what you could say is that receiving your operations reports, receiving the financial reports, and agreeing policy updates, that doesn't mean you have to read every word of every policy yourself. That is going to take about an hour of the meeting each time. Going on from that, you've also got the financial work of looking at the annual report and accounts, looking at your budget for next year so that you can receive financial reports on an ongoing basis. I've put in the AGM and I've put in making a strategic plan for the following year. Now, this one is based on a financial year that is April to March. You may have a different one. So Q1 might be a different time. But roughly speaking, this is what it looks like. And you'll probably spend an hour on average on these things, planning the AGM, who's going to say what, agreeing the reports and so on, agreeing nominations for the trustees. And you may spend a bit more than that on the strategic plan, but it will average out to about this. And then there's all the other stuff I've mentioned, that we've talked about, the premises plans, the risk stuff, trustee training, planning new recruitment of trustees, thinking about partnerships, managing crises and so on. So all of that in 3 hours is quite a big ask. And then you may have the away day as well, which gives you a chance to think about the bigger stuff. I've mentioned 2 tools there, which you may have come across. The STEP, which is the external environment analysis I spoke of, that looks at social, economic, political and technological factors that affect you. And the SWOT looks internally at strengths and weaknesses, and then externally at opportunities and threats. You may have come across these. And they are a whole course in their own, but you might do some of that at an away day once a year, thinking about that, involving other people in those discussions. So all of that is quite a lot, and that doesn't include, this is putting in one package all of the trustee stuff, the governance stuff. And for some organisations that might mean splitting a meeting, so having the morning on this and the afternoon on the more hands-on operations stuff. But it is important as you grow as an organisation to separate those out. So how do you deal with that? Now we've mentioned some of this. I've mentioned subcommittees, and as you grow as an organisation, it's quite important to think about who's doing what. And as the detail grows, you get more and more projects, there may be more and more financial analysis, reports to funders and things to take oversight of. You might establish a finance committee, usually chaired by your treasurer. Now, the important thing to remember about subcommittees or working parties or task and finish groups is they don't have to have just trustees on. So this is a way of getting more hands on deck. And it could be, as you make that transition to a more formal trustee board, that you have people who are not really into that kind of side of things. And they may be quite perfectly happy to serve on a subcommittee, getting a bit more hands on with things, or they may have specialist knowledge that are really useful. Typical subcommittees might be premises, income generation is a common one, or it may be that you have a task and finish group that is only there temporarily, like for the appointment of a CEO, or even a sort of working party for a year or 18 months to help you to make organisational change. So it is a lot, and managing organisational change or something, a big project, can overtax a trustee board. So you can think about other ways of doing it. I've also suggested that your agenda and papers are circulated beforehand. Now, I was arguing this with somebody just recently. Actually, you do have to have written minutes or notes from meetings. It's in your constitution if you've adopted the template, and the Charity Commission has some really good guidance on what you do and don't need to have in your minutes. If things get really difficult and you keep having meetings where you have left things off the bottom and not covered everything, timed meetings can be a way forward, which means that you have a certain amount for discussion, and then after that time the chair will call for opinions and you would make a decision then, or formally put the decision forward to the next meeting if you can. Clear action points, who is doing what by when, that's absolutely crucial. And as we've discussed, ensuring skills on the trustee board. Now on page 7 of the workbook, what I've done is break down what the trustee year might look like. This is absolutely standard. It doesn't really matter what your organisation is doing. These are the things that are going to come up. And you can anticipate this in a year, for a year hence. So you could, to a great extent, make your meetings and make your agendas really far in advance, which will help people to understand the process and what they need to do. Sorry, Nick, did you have a question?
No, I don't. No, not at the
Okay,
moment.
sorry. I thought I heard you saying something. So I recommend this as a quite a useful little starting point, and that will help you to manage it all, because particularly if you're bringing new people on board, they can see what the structure is of the year and what will be required of them at the different stages. Are there any questions on this at the moment? Okay. So, creating a skilled trustee board. And I suggested that there are three steps to this. The first is identifying what skills you need. And what I'm going to ask you to do is to pop on the chat area what skills you think a trustee board needs, given all that we've discussed and particularly what we just looked at in terms of the trustee year and what's the nuts and bolts of it. So what skills do you think a trustee board needs? Hang on, I'm having trouble. Oh, there we go. Right. Financial skills, yes, Nick, you're correct. Any other thoughts? Yeah. A business background can be useful. Trustworthiness, yes. Yeah. Delegation and organisation are crucial. Any other thoughts? Yes, so that kind of ability to prioritise, yes, that's really important. Good listener. Yes, IT skills. To some extent, I mean, let's face it, I mean, I think we've all learned that actually having the opportunity to Zoom can be really important. Yeah, leadership, social media, being able to take an overview, so that kind of strategic way of thinking, people management. Yes, leadership, financial, practical skills. Yeah, excellent. Okay, I'm going to share a screen. Tact. Yes, absolutely. Okay. Can you see my screen share? Yeah.
Yes.
Good. I did want to do 10 minutes and people couldn't see the slides I was talking about, so I'm always a bit paranoid about it. And I'm sorry that this is so small. But one analysis I did was this, and it encapsulates, I think, a lot of what you've been saying. So the core activities of the trustee board, you will need leadership skills and senior management skills, need to be able to do the governance responsibilities, things we've been talking about in terms of the code and the essential trustee. The activities, the skills around financials, property management, as we've said, business planning, strategic planning, which is a particular set of skills. Okay, Nick, all right, see you next time. Legal, company law. Really important to have somebody who has the skills of chairing meetings, particularly if you've got a lot to do. If somebody's got experience around equalities and diversity, networking is an important one, understanding political context, either local government or national government, and somebody who at least one person who can be the champion of the organisation. But then depending on what your priorities are, what your strategy is, and the areas of work, you may get individual trustees taking oversight of specific areas like marketing, income generation, campaigning, or whatever. So, the next step, step 2, is having decided based on your strategy and the role and responsibilities of trustees what skills you want, looking at what skills you do have. Now, many organisations do an occasional or even annual trustee skills audit. And what that does is identify which of the various skills we've talked about individual trustees have. It also looks at what networks they have. Are they a Rotarian? Are they on the parish council? So useful connections that they may have. And that can be repeated, as I say, when you have new trustees or if you haven't done it in a while, to just focus on the skills that you do have. And you might find that between you all, you have some really good skills that can take you in different directions. You can also review the minutes or notes of your meetings and say, actually, this was an issue we struggled with, this was what we didn't. Or just sit together and have a discussion about what skills you do have and make notes of that. You could ask an organisation like us, like DCA, to come in and do a health check or to review your trustee skills, and we can certainly help you with something like that. And to, you know, give some focus and some ways of going on with that. Or you could go and talk to another organisation and benchmark yourselves against their trustee board and nick all of their good ideas. And I mentioned the trustee skills audit. There's some really good information. I think I mentioned briefly the trustee recruitment cycle, which is again a resource put together by several members of the voluntary sector like NCO, CBO, and I think Small Charities Coalition. This is hosted at reachvolunteering.org, and it's one of the pieces it has on there is how to complete a skills audit. It's very good. And the Charity Commission's got a really good leaflet about trustee board and skills. So that's the second step. So the first step is what skills do we need? Second step is what skills do we have? And the third step is how are you going to close that skills gap? Now, One of it is to recruit new trustees with the skills. And that is a very, very usual way of doing that. And if those are skills that you need in the long term, then that is the best way forward. And there are other ways. You could train your existing trustees. If it's something overarching, like financial knowledge that actually all trustees need, then rather than rely on one or two people with those skills, train all of the trustees to at least be able to read a balance sheet and to understand what they're doing, because that's the kind of expertise that everybody needs. You can get mentoring for trustees, either professional or you can do it peer mentoring between organisations. You can also share expertise in other ways. I've known situations where an experienced chair from another organisation came and co-chaired with a less experienced chair until they got their feet under the table. But you can also do joint training or joint away days with other trustees. The really specialist work you can delegate. You can create a task and finish group, or if you have a staff member with those responsibilities, or you can get, if it's sort of one-off, get a consultant organisation in, or an individual consultant. So if it's a specialist HR piece, or if it's some change management, it would be very usual to get in some consultants. So depends on what the gap is, what you decide to do, but you might do a variety of those things. So are there any questions on that bit at the moment? Okay. Right. So that is, let me just stop sharing for a second. That is more or less the meat of it. We're a little ahead of schedule. Oh, I'm sorry you couldn't see that slide. I will send the slides out so you can read them at your leisure, and I am sorry about that. So I'm quite happy to take questions or give opinions on any aspect of that. I will just, I mentioned it earlier, I'll just share my screen again just briefly. We've got some other courses coming up. I mentioned about partnerships. We've got one, oh gosh, next week. I've got two next week and I don't remember what the other one is. On the 20th of October, we've got a course focusing in a bit more detail about trustee board meetings. So it's the stuff we were looking at earlier about managing the information, about receiving the information, about managing the whole thing across the year, and going into more detail about that and how you can develop those effective sort of habits. And we're trying something new. We're putting that on a tea time session. So you might be able to delegate that to trustees who normally say they can't get to things. We're going to be producing a series of materials and short courses for tools and for trustees. And the first of those is in a couple of months. And it's about what we were talking about earlier about understanding the external environments. That's the STEP analysis, among other things. And then we'll be doing risk analysis, stakeholder analysis, and understanding finances, which is another skill we spoke of. And I'd be really interested to know if you think there's any other skills that it would be useful to have materials or a training course on. I've mentioned other resources, and again, this is a busy slide for which I forget. I apologise. We all just to say, if you're not a member, join up. We've got a trustee club, which meets once a month, and we're just resuming that after the summer break. That's on the 15th of this month, and there's a click through here to be able to book that. And finally, I'm going to ask you for some feedback, and this is your opportunity not only to let me know how you think this course has gone. Too detailed? Not. I'd be surprised if anybody says it wasn't detailed enough, but please be honest about that. But I'm also asking you about future courses. So thinking about what I've just said about the tools for trustees. If you can think of anything else that would be useful, please stick that in there. When you click on this, it will open another screen. So I'm quite happy while you're doing that. And if you don't want to do this now, I'll send you a link to it when I send you the slides, and you can do it in your own time. But has anybody got any burning questions on anything we've you all look a bit like you need a bit of a lie down and a think.
Can I ask a question?
Please.
I'm concerned about the relationship between the trustee board, who are unpaid, and the paid employees, who are often more experienced, more skilled in what they're doing, and how we handle that, because we have responsibilities as employers, aren't we, technically?
Yes. Yeah. Yes. That's an enormously good question, and I was once invited to do a master's by research just on that question. I didn't do it, unfortunately, or I'd have a better answer. It is at once the greatest strength of our sector, and in some ways its greatest weakness, I would argue, that the people with the passion manage the staff. And the normal way of the relationship going is that the chair, as a representative of the trustee board, would manage your chief executive officer, usually the CEO or senior manager, and they would be line manager for that, which would fulfill your duties as employers. Then the CEO would manage the rest of the staff.
Yes, we do that, yes.
But this is where the split between strategy and operations is so important, because the trustees are the owners of the strategy. And of course, the staff, volunteers, service users and other stakeholders are invited to help with the thinking, particularly thinking about what are the factors that are going to influence what you do. Because you need a range of opinions and expertise and knowledge to do that. But ultimately, the trustees own the strategy. They are responsible for ensuring the mission and the charity's objects are served, as we've just seen. And if you get too much pushback from the staff on that vision, then that is a problem, and it might be useful to do some organisational development, possibly with an external facilitator. And the same thing applies the other way around with the operations. If the trustees are too prescriptive about the next year's plans, because an operational plan is how much of the strategic direction we're going to do in the next year. It kind of ties things down, puts some targets on things, wraps it up. and that is usually done by the staff team, and they own that. What the trustees then do is monitor, because a good plan, you can tell planning is my passion, can't you? I'd rather do planning than eat chocolate, and that's absolutely true. So the operations plan should have targets that the trustees then monitor, and the staff will report on how they're going against those targets. I mean, obviously it's not a kind of hostile, or shouldn't be a hostile exercise. It's hopefully a celebration each quarter of how well everything's going. There's new money come in, new service users and so on. But ultimately, the trustees take oversight over that. If there's a big piece of work like change management, or big piece of development with a new project, both staff and trustees would probably work together. The key relationship, the absolutely key relationship, is chair and CEO. And if that relationship, or senior manager, if that relationship isn't going well, then the advice is to get some help with that, get some training and so on, because it's the one thing that breaks chairs. It will break, your chair will walk away if that relationship, your CEO might walk away if that relationship is too difficult. So one of the things I would like to do, you know, once we've got the academy up and running, is to do some work around that, with, when you get a new chair or a new CEO, help people to have that relationship, because I've been in that situation loads of times where that relationship is a different one from both sides, actually. And it's so difficult for everybody to do. I mean, there may be a genuine personality clash, but there's nothing to do about that. But there are other ways around that. Another member of the trustee board could manage that individual, or you could co-manage that individual with 2 or more trustees, or something like that. But in general, if it's the relationship between the staff and the trustee board, then a pretty good, stout, facilitated away day to bang heads together would be my advice.
Thank you.
I'm available for a small fee. Weddings and bar mitzvahs. So. Thank you for doing that feedback. If anybody has any other.
Oh, sorry, I'm not quite sure how to do that. I'm struggling with.
Right, if you
can I just request?
Yes.
A course, a seminar, or resource on something on current government HR rules, if you like, as applied to small charities.
Yeah,
because
that's one I hadn't thought about. That. Yeah.
And there's something around that with it doesn't get gov.uk will get you totally bogged down.
I'll send you a link there's a couple of good Charity Commission resources to get you started. And the one you want to look at is ACAS, always. It's much, much clearer and more straightforward. And everything it says is applicable to any employer. And it's got some great templates and things like that. We've got a policies course running fairly soon. We've got various other bits, but I'll certainly, I've got a colleague who's really good on that. So we'll try and put a short course together and possibly even a taster session, because we do free taster sessions now and again. Good, thank you, Peter. I'm sorry, survey's closed. No, I am sorry. It shouldn't be. I will send that out again. I do apologise. I must have clicked something wrong. Oh dear. I'll send the survey with the notes later today. So if there's no other questions, I'll draw the meeting to a close. Thank you very much. Thank you for your contributions. And I hope you found it useful. And I will see you again soon.
Caro, sorry, I
Yes.
have my hand. Sorry,
Sorry, Jane.
Sorry, you mentioned the policies course, which I will look
Yes.
out for. But somewhere back in your talk today, you mentioned the essential policies. I had 3 of the 4 written down as risk management, safeguarding, and GDPR. Could you just tell me what the other one is very quickly?
I will send you the little list. We've got
That'd be great.
a little list of essential
starting point,
policies.
and I will look out for the course as it comes up. But thank you very much. That's brilliant for today. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jane. Thank you. Bye-bye, everybody. Lovely to see you. Sorry you couldn't talk, Nat. Hopefully next time. All right. Bye-bye. Bye.